In recent news, CNN ran a headline, "Some college athletes play like adults, read like fifth graders." And this was released on January 8th when a learning specialist at University of North Carolina found that 60% of the student athletes read at a 4th to 8th grade level, and 8 to 10% read below 3rd grade level. And a few days later, the headline read, "Death threats and denial for women who showed college athletes struggle to read." So these are the stakes that we're going to be playing with. In other news, a $765 million NFL concussion settlement is supposed to cover 20,000 retired players. So there's a judge that has cast some doubt on that, thank God. And on PBS Concussion Watch, this is a screenshot from last night's website. All NFL concussions in the 2013 season by position for a grand total of 150. And we're not done. So, some key terms that I'm going to be working with so that we can all be on the same page. Learning disability in adults who are diagnosed with learning disability or ADHD in childhood and who continue to have problems, albeit perhaps in a slightly different form, so already I'm confused, or adults who have struggled with reading, writing, math, or specific cognitive skills that have affected their learning over the years, but who have never been formally assessed or diagnosed until adulthood. So that is the technical definition. If you understand it, please explain it to me. This will be a developmental disability. So it starts when you're born, and it progresses through your developmental lifespan. On the other hand, we have a mild traumatic brain injury, or MTBI, a complex pathophysiological process affecting the brain, induced by biomechanical forces, and may be caused either by direct blow to the head, face, neck, or elsewhere on the body with an impulsive force transmitted to the head. So when I say pathophysiological, I mean functional changes resulting from disease or injury. So functional changes in the brain, the structure stays the same, but the functions change. When I say biomechanical, I mean structure and functional. So this will be an acquired disability. You are not born with a traumatic brain injury in the case of sports. So where I'm going to be focusing is where the executive skills are located in the brain. So the brain has many different parts that we still don't know. There's sensory information, muscle movement, writing, smell. Executive functions are in the frontal lobe. This is going to be very important later on. When I say executive functions, I mean a system of high-level cognitive processes in the frontal lobe that manage and regulate other cognitive processes, such as planning, organization, time management, working memory, and metacognition. So working memory, when I say that, I mean the ability to hold information in your mind while completing a complex task. So holding past, present, and future at the same time. When I say metacognition, I mean the ability to stand back and take a bird's eye view of yourself in the situation. Executive skills allow us to organize our behavior over time, override immediate demands in favor of longer-term goals, plan and organize activities, sustain attention, and persist to complete a task. And executive skills and functions are also in charge of affect regulation. When I say that, I mean monitoring our emotions and thoughts in order to work more efficiently and effectively. Let's play a game. Find the executive function in the learning disability. So attention deficit hyperactive disorder. Core deficits are in measures of attention, information, processing speed, executive function, learning, and memory. That one was easy. Executive functions are listed. Dysgraphia, impaired handwriting, which is legible letter formation and automatic letter retrieval and production, and or spelling without reading problems. So this is the writing disability. If you guessed executive function are found in working memory for automatic letter retrieval, you're correct. Paula's nodding. So if I were to ask you to spell the word Jabberwocky, it's not a real word, so you're going to have to retrieve the syllables and phonemes, the hooked on phonics, to spell that out. A person with dysgraphia might have issues with that. Dyslexia, impaired accuracy and or rate of oral reading of real words or pseudo-words, like Jabberwocky, and written spelling. Also impaired verbal fluency and speed of reading. So if I asked you to if I showed you Jabberwocky and you couldn't pronounce the word, that would be one example. So the working memory issues would be in speed and fluency in dyslexia. There it is, Jabberwocky, in case you wanted to know. Nonverbal learning disability. Impaired social cognition, social use of language and interaction, visual spatial organization, complex touch stimulation, perceptual and or complex motor skills. So if you guessed affect regulation for executive function, you're correct. And finally, oral and written language learning disability. Impaired word retrieval, syntax awareness, text inferencing, listening and reading comprehension, and or oral and written expression. So working memory is in abundance in almost all of these impairments. So again, these learning disabilities are in the front of the brain. So here are some nuggets from learning disability and ADHD because they are separated. ADHD is the most common childhood neurobehavioral disorder, affecting about 2 to 5% of children. Boys are 4 to 9 times more likely to suffer from ADHD than girls, and anxiety and depression are possible. In one study of 870 athletes, ADHD was found in 7.3%, which is higher than the general population, and the highest levels were found in football, 17.5%. ADHD thus appears to be more prevalent in athletes than in the general population. So the conclusion is, pre-injury learning disability and or ADHD can complicate diagnosis and management of a concussion. So now, this is someone who I follow on Twitter, and they said, people tell me they're jealous of my exam accommodations but I'm jealous they can think straight. Hashtag concussion props. Which is why I got a Twitter, actually, in the first place, so that I can find out what people's personal narratives were, as well as research information. So this is the anatomy of a concussion. A concussion occurs when a violent blow to the head causes the brain to slam against the skull beyond the ability of the cerebrospinal fluid to cushion the impact, starting from 1, vibrating up to 3. When a football player takes a hit to the head, speeds range from 17 to 25 miles per hour, with the force averaging 98 times the force of gravity. A study by the NFL revealed most hits occurred from a blow to the side of the head, often to the lower half of the face. The middle of the brain. The shockwave passes through the brain and bounces back off the skull. The concussion usually occurs at the opposite side from the point of impact. So point of impact of the frontal lobe, reverberating, affecting the back of the brain. The impact can cause bruising of the brain, tearing of blood vessels, and nerve damage. So if we want to look at some numbers, of the 1.4 million who sustain traumatic brain injuries in the United States each year, 50,000 die, 235,000 are hospitalized, 1.1 million are treated and released from an emergency department. And among children up to 14 years of age, TBI results in an estimated 2,685 deaths, 37,000 hospitalizations, 435,000 emergency department visits annually. So again, these are the stakes that we're playing with when we talk about frontal lobe injuries and anatomies of concussion. And I really like this one because it's specific to football. So some nuggets about MTBI. Cognitive. Multiple concussions may interfere with executive skills, which we know are response and initiation/inhibition, divided attention, and concentration. Another cognitive. Trouble task setting, if-then logic, which we heard about consequences, and adjustment of contention scheduling. I'm already meeting someone for 12 at lunch. What do? I can move them to 2 o'clock, but I don't know. I'm confused. I'm shutting down. Affective nuggets would be impaired ability to empathize, difficulty judging the status of recovery, and a behavioral nugget would be fatigue, aggression, poor impulse control, irritability, anhedonia, apathy, clinical depression, sleep difficulties. And I had to look up what anhedonia meant, because I've never heard of that. The inability to experience pleasure from activities usually found enjoyable. So I just want you to think and pick your favorite activity and then take away the enjoyment that you receive from that. So the basic underlying issue is that the economy of your brain's resources diminish. So with the complexity of the frontal lobe, adding insult to injury is that you have these internal impairments that literally collide with external forces. And I want to talk about the combination of the two. And one of the problems I have is that monkey see, monkey do. Kids do what they see on Sunday Night Football, Monday Night Football, regardless of what programs they're put in, regardless of what Pop Warner coaches are teaching them. So here are some qualitative barriers to reporting concussions that one study found. These are the emergent themes. Athletes know concussions are dangerous. Most athletes would still play with concussive symptoms. Athletes want to keep playing. It's hard to tell if you're injured. You're supposed to play injured. Don't want to let the team down. The coach matters. What's the coach's view on masculinity? How to report? Should you report? Should you play through it? Is that a bell ringer? Oh, by the way, this is a high school study done last year. So this is what's going on in high schools. And one football player from this high school study said, the coaches call you bad words if you come out. They say, when you're hurt, come out, but they don't mean it. If you say anything, they just call you a wuss and tell you you're overreacting and that you can play through it. Issues I have. This is me myself. Kids do what they see. So if you have anxiety and depression present in a learning disability and or ADHD, and then if you have anxiety and depression present in a concussion, what happens when you have both? They're exacerbated. There's no number we can really put on that, but they are, and they need to be identified and talked about. There's an issue of cognitive rest in academia. So if you're in a 10-week quarter system and you're on week 3 and you play on Saturday, you have a midterm on Monday. What happens when you're sensitive to light, you're fatigued, you can't sleep, you can't keep anything down, looking at your phone screen hurts, having a conversation for 5 minutes leaves you completely exhausted. But what are you supposed to do when you have a final or a midterm? There's also disagreement within the rate of recovery in research. The earliest I've seen is 48 hours. It takes 48 hours to make a full cognitive recovery. Then I've seen it takes up to 7 days. But then let's add to that, re-injuries typically take place 7 to 10 days following the first concussion. That's just the first concussion. So there's a lack of research and there's lack of agreement. And I think there's a lack of research about learning disabilities, ADHD, and concussion, and combining them, and all these things that we're supposed to be doing in our frontal lobe to be functioning individuals. There's a lack of coach awareness. What does a coach do when they have student athletes with learning disabilities who process plays differently, who process following directions differently? If the coach is showing a visual screen, what happens if the student athlete needs 2 extra hours to read through the playbook, but they aren't given that time? What happens when they're in the weight room? Am I on 5 reps or am I on 15 reps? Oh well, I'll keep going. And then there's stereotype threat. So Claude Steele is my conceptual framework, and he says that the threat of a stereotype is just as powerful as the actual stereotype. So this affects your cognitive resources as well, one's cognitive resources. And we've all experienced this, we've all perpetuated it, we've all been on both sides. So in the athletic world, what happens if I report? What happens if my peers see me going to the learning specialist? Are they going to call me stupid? And I'm being nice with the words I'm using. Another issue I have, Dr. Sean Harper at University of Pennsylvania found that from 2007 to 2010, black men were 2.8% of full-time degree-seeking undergraduate students, 57.1% of football teams, and 64.3% of basketball teams. So that's the statistic. I'm just going to let it marinate. That's an issue I have, personally. So I found that concussion education may not be as important as concussion management. So if brain reserve capacity continues to lower, what should we do? And by we, who are we? What about them? What about they? What are they going to do? So what do we do in school? How do we teach student athletes with dyslexia and ADHD and they're on their 7th concussion? What's the academic advisor to do? What's the professor to do? Should they sign off on that extra time on the midterm? What about Pee Wee policy? I don't know if you guys have heard of Heads Up. Heads Up is an NFL program where they've spent $1.5 million to persuade parents that it is making football safer by teaching tackling techniques that will reduce concussions. My favorite part is that Nate Jackson, who played for the Denver Broncos, said, he describes Heads Up as a product that the NFL is selling to create the illusion that the game is safe or can be made safe. The tackling techniques are laughable when applied to game and practice situations, with players moving at high speeds and colliding from different angles with their heads. It's rather shameless. I think it's sad. And Jackson wrote a book called Slow Getting Up. I haven't read it, I just want to put it out there. I think it's indicative of what the league's motives are. Profit, profit, profit. What should the NCAA do? What should they do with their sideline protocols? What should they do with their return to play procedures, which I'm going to show you in a couple of slides what they do. What should the NFL do? They're in the middle of a litigation war. A judge says $765 million isn't enough. Wives are like, I don't care what you say. My husband still needs brain scans, and he's 60 years old, and he stopped playing when he was 25. Who's going to provide this money? What should family education look like? How do you tell families to support their loved ones who are going through personality changes and clinical depression, who don't remember their kids' soccer games? And so this is part of rehabilitation during the career and after the career, when the league is done with you, when college is done with you. And then, should we invest resources in helmets, or should we invest in the gladiator culture of sports? I don't know. I'm just saying that helmets were initially invented to prevent skull fractures, not to prevent concussions. And who's going to put pressure on these multi-million, billion-dollar institutions to be accountable? So if we're going to continue to operate in a broken system, I think we should address the revenue-generating players being admitted because of their athletic talent but lack of academic ability. I think we should address major stacking, shoving student-athletes into majors that may not give them a career that they can do something with. I've been in several situations where I've asked a student who I've worked with at different institutions, what do you want to do when you're done? Let's say you go pro. Okay, so you're 26 and you're done. Now what? I want to own a clothing store. Okay, what's your major? American Ethnic Studies? Okay. Time commitments of being a full-time student and a full-time athlete. Something's got to give, and things usually do. Hiding information from players about their injuries, which is what got the NFL into the settlement in the first place. Then there's the bounty programs in the NFL and in Pee Wee football. So the New Orleans Saints were busted for a bounty program, but they were only busted because they were caught, where the Saint players allegedly earned bonuses for inflicting injuries on opposing players that forced them to leave the game. However, none of the hits in question were ever penalized or deemed illegal by in-game officials. So players were taking tens of thousands of dollars out onto other players' heads and saying, I bet you can't take that player out. To which other team players would say, I will pay you $75,000 to protect me from this player because I know that they're trying to take me out. So there's lots of money at stake between players. And also, what does this have to do with Pee Wee? Well, last year, there's a Pee Wee league in Orange County in the great state of California that parents were paying their kids up to $20 to $50 to take other kids out. Just saying. And they were just the ones that were caught. And within this broken system, how do we care about athletes as people? So something I bet you didn't know is that a couple of players from the Kansas City Chiefs got together and joined in on the lawsuit, and they said that rather than protecting players who sustained concussions, The Chiefs increased their risks by giving them ammonia inhalants, caffeine cocktails, or Toradolto to abbreviate the need for concussed employees to miss work time due to a brain injury. Toradol is an injectable anti-inflammatory drug used short-term to treat moderate to severe pain. So if you're wondering what they're doing to stay superhuman, those are just 3 examples. Players were even more prone to head injuries because of the concrete-like AstroTurf surface that was in place until 1994. So back to caring about athletes as people. This is 2012, Robert Woods, USC versus Utah. Robert Woods was just hit, and this was his reaction. The questions that he was asked on the sideline protocols that I was talking about, by the medical staff. Who is the current president? What is today's date? What is 100 minus 7 minus 7 minus 7? It took one whole play for him to answer these questions and be sent back in. I'm not a doctor. No one in this room is a doctor, but we have a doctor. We have a doctor. Doctor, in your medical opinion, would you send this player back in after one play? Yeah, looks like a concussion to me. So my question is it worth it? One of Robert Woods' teammates said, "There's no way you're going to have Robertson on the bench, no matter what it is." And guess what? That teammate was right, no matter what it is. So if we're going to care about athletes as people, in light of the broken system, I think we need to be offering them the Cadillac of support systems instead of the Pinto that they're getting. Thank you, Clay Cook, for giving me that tidbit. And as a very wise audience member said to me 2 hours ago, this is just the beginning of an ongoing conversation for the people in this room and the people to come. And as Audre Lorde said, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Thank you very much. Thank you. And arguments against us would say, well, when you get in a car, you might get into a car accident. So I think that the helmet investment is a red herring, and it's just busy work to show that there's something being done, because science needs to move forward, as Roger Goodell said. Science needs to move forward. Exactly. Someone else have a question?
I got a little bit, kind of an ethical dilemma, so it might be kind of a tough question. You can defer to another conversation, but thinking about just kind of the symptoms that have come out of your presentation was excellent in terms of ADHD and learning disabilities. Those symptoms can actually be like the direct result of something associated with concussion. So after multiple concussions, you can actually show ADHD and another learning disability perhaps. And thinking about that and the age of the athlete, they can actually be assessed at that point to be determined eligible for special support of, for instance, learning disability or ADHD when it's actually entirely concussion originated.
Right.
Do you think that would be an ethical practice, essentially, to diagnose someone and make them eligible for extra services when the root of it is something's concussion?
Well, I think it could be circumvented by doing baseline testing in the beginning, which only a handful of universities do. I think athletes need to be baseline tested and given a neuropsychological evaluation before they start practicing, so that when, not if, but when they are hit, and they return to baseline, it can match with their original bit. So if they already have verbal fluency issues, then the team doctor can see verbal fluency issues are below normal, but that's okay because that's where they started. So yes, it's ethical, but I think that is one easy and expensive fix.